Good morning, and welcome to Legal Issues of the Day. We have, this is Attorney Nathaniel Lee, and I'd like to thank our audience for joining us for this important occasion. We have our superstar panel with us this week. We have Attorney Milton from LA, who represented the beginning of the civil rights movement as relates to police misconduct, and our crack research analyst, masters in tax, cyber security expert, Attorney Vanita from the Chicago region of the country. So we have an exciting show planned for today, but we cannot forget the day this weekend is the precursor to the holiday of the King, that is, the Reverend Martin Luther King. And so we see political pundits talk about this matter from time to time, but today we're going to discuss some of the important factors as to why he became such an important figure in our American democracy. And I mean democracy because King led the effort to establish the Voting Rights Act, and that's a big deal in America history. Counselor, how are you doing today?
Fine, thank you, Mr. Lee. Doing just fine. Good to see you.
Good
Attorney
morning,
Banks?
and thank you.
Well, the King, a lot of people, we now get from time to time a distorted version of history. But let's just briefly recap history. Why was there such a big need? I see now the politician and political pundits and use the word woke and not really realizing the origin of the word woke, but the issue of Martin Luther King is so important in our history because at some point in time, we had this great divide in our country. We had segregation, we had oppression of Blacks, but the civil rights era by Martin Luther King was a peaceful process that led to the passage of important legislation that we still see today. And everybody remember maybe the greatest speech of all time delivered that fateful day in Washington, D.C. called I Have a Dream. That speech still is important today. You know, as we go from president to president, we still are seeking that America, whereby diversity is welcomed by everyone and everybody understand the importance of the contribution, particularly African Americans in our country. So that's where we are today. And so we're honoring the greatest civil rights leader of all time. It was so important that they named a federal holiday. And that was met with a lot of controversy, I remember, as the legislation came through the process. I remember when I was in law school at the University of Georgia, who incidentally won a national championship in football again 2 years ago.
Nobody is interested in that. Keep on talking about
it. But the teams from California, I think that famous team called Southern California, with the $1 billion coach, they didn't make the playoff. So
okay.
I thought I'd throw that in. Sorry about that, but they pay a coach $110 million. I would think that, well, so much for that. But is there any special activities, Attorney Banks, in your neck of the wood honoring Dr. King?
Yes, Attorney Lee. There are events and programs and activities occurring all over the state of Illinois, and to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King, who would be 94 years old tomorrow, which is the date of his birthday. And he is the only non-president to have a federal holiday named in his honor. And this holiday, his birthday, is designated as a day of service. And most of us are familiar with Dr. King's.
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear me?
I can hear. No, I can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead. Turn your volume up a little bit.
I'm
sir.
increasing my volume. Is it better?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
As Attorney Lee stated, most of us are familiar with Dr. King's historic I Have a Dream speech in 1963. And given the attacks on voting rights, I've been reflecting on his lesser known Give Us the Ballot speech, which was delivered at the prayer pilgrimage for freedom on May 17th, 1957, at the Lincoln Memorial, attended by over 25,000 people and delivered by Dr. King when he was just 28 years old. And I wanted to share just some excerpts of that speech because Dr. King's words still resonate today. Give us the ballot and we will no longer have to worry about the federal government Give us the ballot and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot and we will no longer plead to the federal government for the passage of an anti-lynching law. Give us the ballot and we will fill our legislative halls with men of good will. Give us the ballot and we will place judges on the benches of the South who will do justly and love mercy. Give us the ballot and we will quietly and non-violently, without rancor or bitterness, implement the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision. The Brown decision, the historic landmark Brown decision, was decided on May 17th, 1954, 3 years before Dr. King's Give Us the Ballot speech. And as you can see, many of his words still resonate today.
Attorney Grimes.
We have some activities planned here in LA as usual on King Boulevard here in South LA, a parade, etc., to honor this great civil rights leader. I go back though, when I think of Dr. King, and I'm oftentimes quoting him for point of view and thought. When I was a young man in college, and there was a recruitment throughout our school at West Virginia State University for freedom riders, young people to go down to Alabama and other places to support the nonviolent movement. And I, at that time, did not appreciate Dr. King. I thought that he was less of a man than I wanted to be because he preached turning the other cheek and nonviolence and letting yourself by racist dogs sicked on you and fire hoses pointed on you and women be beaten in front of you. And I thought that was not the mark of a man that I wanted to be. And so I did not support him. I thought that Stokely Carmichael, Rap Brown, Malcolm X, you name it, the more militant leaders were the symbol of a man that I wanted to be. And then I graduated from college, and I had a minimum participation. Then I graduated from college, came to California in '67 after graduation. And I never forget driving down the freeway. I think it was the 91 freeway here between LA and Orange County. And it came on the radio that Dr. King has been killed. And I had to pull over. And I'm getting a shiver right now talking about it. I had to pull over, Nate, and just burst into tears as if my closest relative, my child or my father, had been killed, not died, but had been killed by an assassin. And I bawled to, I don't know how long, and finally got myself together and drove on home. And I remember seeing men, white men, cheering and with their hands out the window, "King is dead, King is dead." And almost got in a fight with another person about them cheering for the king. King is dead, King is dead. And it hit me hard that this man was a better man than me. He was stronger than I was because he had faced this enemy of ours with a better plan. The man, at that time, I was a couple of years and thought I could take on Godzilla, but it turned me around about the power of nonviolence, that experience, and it made me appreciate that in the bigger scheme of things, that was the best way of going about the civil rights movement. And it also pushed me to do something about the plight of Black people in the civil rights movement. That year, I decided to go to law school because I wanted to make a difference, because the NAACP wasn't moving fast enough for me. And I came to the realization that I didn't have the courage to be a Panther because I didn't like the idea of being shot at. And they were just murdering Panthers from Chicago to California to New York, all around the country, like it was hunting season. And so this man's life, I started reading about and appreciating what it took to turn the other cheek. And looking at Gandhi and others, it's one in a lifetime person that has come through here. And I'm very proud of him.
Well, for historical context, I was a kid at the time, but he was murdered on April 4th, 1968. I remember seeing the news footage at that Lorraine Motel there in Memphis, Tennessee. He had been arrested over 30 times, maybe 30 or 35 times, been arrested for advancing civil rights causes. But here's something I never understood, that even today, he was being monitored by the FBI. So you have a guy who had escaped from prison, James Earl Ray, somehow get a high-powered rifle to assassinate him. That never sat well with me. You know, throughout history, I always wondered about how this transpired. A guy who's been monitored by the FBI and suddenly get murdered by, it was just so convenient. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it just irked me for a number of years. And he, of course, was sentenced only to a 99-year prison term for an assassination. And that bothered me too. You know, I've never been a big proponent of the death penalty, but I thought that somebody would put this escaped felon, a guy just breaks out of prison and go out to murder somebody. That didn't make any sense to me. Never did, never will.
Yeah, I've often, when speaking around the country, asked the question, and I don't know, for some reason back in the 90s, it caught on to me. Did he die in vain? Did he die in vain? and asking the audience that, and to see the mixture of opinions about whether or not he sacrificed his life for cause of other people, for the freedom of other people, for the job rights of other people, for fair employment. Did he die in vain? I don't know if I fully have answered that question for myself today. You know, he gave up a lot for his fellow man. Did he die in vain?
Yeah. Hey, Attorney Banks, did you ever wonder how, in your mind, this assassination by escaped convict James Earl Ray, and we know that the FBI had wiretaps on him, they were monitoring him, and that assassination still eats at me today, quite frankly.
Likewise, Attorney Lee, it was ultimately reported that James Earl Ray was acted alone and that he was, the lone shooter, but that report has not set well with me all of these years.
I have a bad connection, Nate. I'm sorry, I can't. Both of you keep dropping off.
That's your internet connection.
Okay.
Yeah. If you have two things on your internet, shut one off and then they'll get a better reception if somebody else is using it, usually.
All right.
Yeah. So what were you saying, Attorney Banks?
It was ultimately reported, as you know, that James Earl Ray acted alone, but that is based on the comments that you've made, Attorney Lee, as well. It's just really difficult and hard to believe at that time, and even as we speak today.
Well, in order to do this assassination, you had to have intel to know what hotel he was staying at, what hotel room he was staying at, and he had to have some type of surveillance. So somebody had to give him information in order to be able to strategically plan an assassination. It's something that's, I don't think it's just random. And that's why this always bothered me all these years, just ate at me. And, but in any event, when I was in law school, it was a big deal. Okay, I think we have Imhotep on the line. You have a question or comment for us today, sir?
Good morning, Brother Nate, Attorney Banks.
Morning.
Thank you for taking my call. Appreciate you all. I saw the interview or the report back before Ray died when Dexter went to go meet with him. And Ray told him, hey, I didn't kill your dad. And Dexter believed him. So now when we get this other information about with the Malcolm X situation now and those men being exonerated, the disproportionate, I remember when Huey Newton was killed and how the various doubts about that. We know that COINTELPRO and things like that. We know that we have dealt with a shoddy government for a long time. J. Edgar Hoover and those lists of people he targeted. It's a very troubling time. And so now we just get a congressman from Indiana. A person from Indiana who just threatened a congressman. Did you see that report, Nate? Did you see that? The guy that I think he's working for a company here, they fired him. Well, he threatened a congressman on Twitter, threatened him to kill him and his family and stuff like that. So we still have deranged people going on. But I want to ask you guys, I'm a healthcare professional, you all are attorneys. We're bound by ethics by the state. The state gives us our license. And I'm seeing disturbing videos of teachers fighting with students. Now, I thought teachers were state licensed too, because we have strict ethic laws. I know people who worked with the most dire patients, violent in healthcare settings. They do what they CPI or TCI, CPT or TCI training, physical holds to stop them. Never, ever, ever do you hit patients no matter what. The FBI can get the most violent people armed to come out of homes and calm down and surrender without incident. So in your legal opinion, is there ever a time teachers should be beating up on students? I mean, beating students from a legal perspective. because we know what the state does in governing our licenses and stuff like that. So how is it not enough training? Like with CPT training, you're taught to blocks, or TCI training, you're taught just how to block if you're being attacked. Karate, basically martial arts moves. You're taught
Wait
to
a second.
defense
What
first, block,
I
step
missed
back.
something. I missed some. What school that you're talking about was beating up?
New video
students by
just come out of Houston. Video just come out of Houston. Young man, we're just having an issue in class and seeing in psych training, give a person time. But anyway, the teacher came from another room, jumped on his student, and physically started pummeling the student. I've never seen that in healthcare, and I've seen the most irate patients coming in hospitals or other settings that you've ever seen. I've never seen a healthcare professional punching patients. They know it's a no-no. So why is that not a no-no? And why does the public think that's okay for teachers to jump on students, children, stuff like, instead of taking a defensive posture or removing yourself from the scene? I think it's a lack of training. But from your legal perspective, do you think legally that they have a leg to stand on to physically fight with students? And thanks for taking my call.
Well, it results in a civil lawsuit. I mean, battery is a compensable claim. So if the parents of the minor child feel that the child was abused, they could sue the teacher in the school district. And so that would be the legal remedy. I mean, as a civil trial lawyer, we don't get involved in termination of teacher. We don't get involved in prosecution of teacher. That's outside the scope. There is a dichotomy between the government officials, such as prosecutors or district attorneys. Their job is to represent the state and to enforce laws. So the enforcement law means prosecution. So if the teacher committed a crime, they could be arrested and prosecuted. But the civil lawyer, on the other hand, our role is dramatically different. Our role is to get justice by monetary compensation. Our country is one of the greatest countries in the world with the Seventh Amendment. We're allowed to have jury trials. So whenever people are victim of batteries or misconduct, police misconduct or teacher misconduct, otherwise you have a right to file a lawsuit to collect damages. And but other than that, I don't have another comment on the issue. Do you, Milton?
Yeah, I do. I do. My partner is a teacher, and I don't think there's any justification to use the schoolroom as I won't say torture chamber, but as a place to beat a child and not deal with them in a more psychological way than beating, because you can't control the beating of a person. You could forever traumatize. And so I do believe that there should be a strong law in every state against corporal punishment in the classroom, because it's a threat of not being objective. It's a threat of abuse, and we got to train teachers to use another method of control and teaching and discipline. I don't even want to use punishment. So I, in answering your question, sir, the caller, I don't personally think it should ever be allowed that a principal, vice principal, or teacher, or janitor, or policeman should put their hands on a child unless you're faced with a violent force, deadly force, or threatening force against you personally at that moment. So we got to train our teachers and policemen better on how to address psychologically aggressive people, and can't be putting immature, untrained people in the classroom even any more than we put them on the streets and give them a gun to be a policeman. So it's time for our society to wake up and approach things in a more intelligent fashion.
Our caller is from Indiana, and the Indiana Penal Code provides that when a teacher causes bodily harm or falls short of offering the student any benefits in good faith, that this kind of crime is punishable as a punishable crime.
It should
So,
be.
so a teacher could be prosecuted for assault and battery. And then Attorney Lee also discussed the civil remedies as well.
And see, what has happened in our society that most people don't realize is that in the last decade, when I talked to Attorney Grimes early on, they've had a lot of issues going out in California this week. There were a lot of adverse things, but you had a lot of shootings, like in a lot of major cities now. But one of the problems that I see that's becoming more prevalent is police officers that shoot, particularly African Americans. It seems like that is back on the rise again. And one of the things that occurred is the notion of this judicially created remedy that protects officers called qualified immunity. Qualified immunity, when I started doing police misconduct cases, didn't have any really teeth. But now the officers, I heard a tape in one of my discovery whereby in the training academy, the officers were being trained now, Milton, Vanita, to say, I was in fear of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then so they say, I'm in fear of my life. And that's the justification that gives them the right to shoot and kill innocent person. And then, so you have this defense that's going amok, I think, is that it gives them too much protection. And but on the other hand, when you talk about teachers, I've not seen cases where teachers were given the immunity, similar type of immunity. I'm not aware of it. I know that back in law school, I looked at the 1983 litigation of federal civil rights statute, but I'm not aware of those cases that give teachers that type of protection, and I'll double check that, but because we've sued school district oftentimes for all sorts of things, whether teacher misconduct, other student misconduct, or premise liability or otherwise, because there's a lot of things that goes on in our school. Now, our schools today are probably less safe than they've been at any time in our lifetime. And so because of that, the misconduct issues are not necessarily addressed, in my mind, correctly today. I see an escalation from time to time. And we have a couple callers. Okay, producer, we'll take one quick call. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, Attorney
Hey,
Lee,
caller.
and to everyone. Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I am asking a question of integrity, and as Dr. Martin Luther King stood for integrity and justice, if an attorney has been suspended for integral issues and doing some things, and you have once acquired or you have acquired that attorney, they are actively on a case that has been pending for almost 2 years, should have filed different discoveries, different motions, omnibus dates, fast and speedy. Then you get to a point, you're calling, you're trying to get information to find out why the attorney is not responding to you. Then you ask for withdrawal, no one's responding. You go contact other attorneys and say, well, this attorney is upright, they are the best in the city, et cetera, all to find out that attorney has been suspended. Then nobody contacts you. They have taken your money. Then you have to petition the court to go before the judge to see if you can get another attorney. You now have a public defender who states that they cannot get any of the evidence, the discoveries and things like that from other attorney, and then the prosecutor does not have to release those things if they don't want to. And here you are in limbo. You have a loved one that has been sitting, waiting for trial for at least almost 2 years, 19 months. Where do you go? What repercussion do you have? If that attorney has integral issues and have been disbarred for a year from doing due diligence or serving, they have your money. then you acquire another attorney. How do we know that we are getting fair treatment and things that should have been filed, suppression and all that kind of stuff? Where do we go? What do? We need help.
Well, I can give you a detailed analysis of the steps you take. I serve on the Lawyers Ethics Committee, but in general, if you hired an attorney to take over a case from another lawyer who's got suspended, then that attorney should be able to obtain the same discovery. And when I've taken over a file for lawyers who became ill, died, or otherwise not practicing, I would just simply go by their office and grab the file. So, it's not complicated, a process, but the lawyer that you hire should be able to fix the problem, because the deadlines that you're speaking of are not going to deter the lawyer from getting discovery to protect the individual defendant's right. So in a nutshell, unfortunately, though, you pay money to an attorney, and unfortunately, you could sue the attorney for malpractice, and he should have insurance coverage. And so that's one of the remedies you could do, because if they don't have a license, they're probably not going to have a lot of money, but they should have insurance coverage to pay for your damages in terms of financial losses. But if you have further questions, you could probably call me at the office on Tuesday, and I can look into it and maybe render you some additional assistance. Okay.
Attorney Lee?
Yes.
I will call you on Tuesday.
Okay. Take care, ma'am.
I wanted to follow back up on the question regarding corporal punishment in Indiana schools. And while a number of states have prohibited corporal punishment, as I look closely at Indiana, under Code Section 28, 1-5, 1 to 3, that teachers can take disciplinary action necessary to promote orderly student conduct. And so this sounds like in Indiana that teachers would have more leeway than states in which corporal punishment has been prohibited in public schools.
Hey, Counsel, the weirdest thing, I've been practicing a long time. I've done over 180 jury trials, but when I hear the thing about the corporal punishment of students, my most substantial cases against school corporation and teacher misconduct is not that they were abusing them physically, but it was involved inappropriate sexual advances and things like that. And so we've gotten substantial amount of settlements based upon teachers having a relationship with students, inappropriate relationship. It's just been a whole lot of them over the years. More so because when we do the settlement, they're confidential for two reasons. One is because they're minor children. Two is because it's not in the best interest of the child for that to become publicly known. But we've been doing those for years. And then oftentimes you read in the paper where the teachers are prosecuted for these inappropriate misconduct, but not all the time. Classroom violence, I guess, could go both ways. We saw tragically a 6-year-old kid shot a teacher in Virginia. The threat of violence, I think, goes both ways, but rarely have I seen a lot of cases where teachers were inappropriately battering students, and I've seen a lot of cases where out of control students have attacked other students and even teachers. I've seen videos of that, but I'm sure that it does occur, but as a practical matter, the violence of any kind should not be tolerated by anyone. But Milton, did you see the 6-year-old kid shot the teacher in Virginia? That bothered me. That I'm thinking, how could a 6-year-old kid get a loaded gun, put it in his backpack, and take it to school and shoot someone.
They pick the guns up in the house where they are negligently laid around or not secured, and they put it in their backpack and they take it to school as kids do to show it off and get attention. So I can see easily how a child could take a gun to school because they haven't been trained or taught or appreciate the responsibility of a gun. Otherwise, I did not see that particular case you're talking about. But yeah, I can see a child with a gun to school because they don't appreciate the danger that they're creating. Sorry to say.
And I believe that in this situation of the 6-year-old in Virginia that took the gun to school in their backpack, that the parents should be held criminally responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've had debates on that, Milton, on earlier shows.
And sometimes a child is traumatized or afraid because of bullying and want to protect themselves. And they heard enough said about guns that that's the way to protect yourself against a bully. I don't know the reason this child took that gun to school, but I don't something that can't easily happen. I'm sorry, did they kill?
The teacher was in critical care, but she's doing better now.
I see. And was it a negligent shooting or an intentional shooting of the teacher?
Intentional shooting.
Intentional.
It was
Shot in the
Rich Neck
chest.
Elementary School in Newport News, Virginia.
I'm familiar with that. No, I hadn't heard about it. I've been kind of out of the mainstream on news here in the last week or two. I have a client who was, when he was 6 years old, he did attack his first grade teacher with a pencil, tried to stab her. And he was diagnosed, believe it or not, with schizophrenia back then. I'm presently representing him as an adult, 35 years old. He shot his girlfriend in the lip. He got out of the car, around to her side of the car and shot her in the hip and shot her in the leg. Went down and committed a robbery at a service station and took a car and carjacked a woman at the gas pump. Drove down the street, drove down the freeway, ran out of gas, left the car on the side of the freeway, and walked off an off ramp and carjacked another person at the gas pump, and drove that car to LA and to his father's home, and they surrendered him the next day to the police. This young man was for help though for about 6 months before this incident occurred because he was hearing voices, but the regional center, the county mental health department, would not attend to his request and need. And so he pulled off this bizarre act. Who's responsible? Is society responsible, or is he responsible totally? I don't know. I think that we have a duty to help people who have mental illness much more so than what we are doing at the present.
Hey, can you lift your camera a little bit higher, Counselor? Let's go to the line. We have Pierre Pullins. Pierre, you have a question to come in? That's better. Great, thank you.
I can't
Pierre, you
hear
had a
you.
question. Yeah, that's good.
Went off.
Pierre, you had a question to come in for us today, sir.
Yes, good morning, attorneys. I called in to Joe Madison this week, and Joe was having a discussion about a young man, a 13-year-old boy that was shot and killed, still in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Guy comes out, and the person who shot him was a city employee for Washington, D.C. out there. And when you get into the facts, you find out that the car didn't even belong to the guy. However, you had a young man. We don't know what really transpired. But Joe knew where I was going, and he hung up on me. And Milton knew you know where I'm going too.
I don't know where
I'm sorry that young man lost. I'm sorry that young man lost his life, and I wish that guy hadn't gone outside and shot him. But if I'm on the jury, you got a man, family man, working for the city. I just can't send that guy to jail or to prison. Now, y'all think he's going to be charged? I'm sure he's going to get charged with something because the community wants his head. But I'm quite sure there's a whole lot of other people in the community that are tired of getting their cars broken into, tired of getting jacked in the morning when they're starting their cars and warming their cars up, or getting out and going to work. I know what y'all think, 'cause y'all lawyers and y'all attorneys, but if I'm sitting in that jury box, I just can't send that guy to prison.
Well, the
I just
problem,
wanted to
though,
bring that up.
the case you're talking about is a 13-year-old kid named Karan Blake. At 4:00 in the morning, he was attempting to get into some car, and the guy came outside and shot and killed him. And so, the question you have to have is was that reasonable force at the time? And at the time he shot him, how did he know that that kid didn't have a right to get into the car? I don't know. The question is, it was under investigation, I understand, but you're advocating using deadly force for what may be a misdemeanor. So in other words, if the kid was attempting to take the car, or say he was doing vandalism, that may be a misdemeanor. Or if it's theft, it could be a felony. It just depends on the nature and extent of what he's doing. But in general, our law doesn't allow you to murder someone just because they're doing a misdemeanor. If we had that occur, we'll probably lose 10% of the population in America if that became the law. So you shouldn't say that if I get on a jury, a person should be acquitted, because if you take that logic to the extreme, you're going to wipe out 10% of the population in the United States, because you're saying that everybody who commit these miscellaneous offenses should be killed. Do you want to live in a society whereby you have people murdered because they maybe commit misdemeanors or low-level felonies?
I wouldn't want to live in.
I don't either, but what type of defense you think the man's going to put up? Because he could say, I went out there to investigate the matter, and I was in fear of my life. I didn't know he was a young kid. Some of these young kids are look like they're 6'4". So you guys were talking about teachers fighting students. We got a lot of teachers getting beat up in classrooms across America.
I don't know what defense this person is going to put up, but every case should be looked at individually. But just on a basic principle, I don't think any life should be taken over a piece of property. I think the law is clear that you're entitled to take another person's life if you're in fear of your life, if you think that they pose a serious threat or deadly threat to you. But if they take your Rolls Royce that you paid $500,000 for from in front of you, and you're not in danger of deadly force or serious bodily injury, you do not have a right, under most laws that I know, to kill that individual because they're taking a piece of expensive effing property from you. I don't see any property that equals the value of a human life. So yes, there should be some consequence for an individual that says, I killed a person because they were stealing my car, my jewelry, or whatever piece of material property they were taking. The law does not permit that unless there is some threat to your safety. That's what I understand the law to be, pretty much universal. Maybe I'm wrong, but, and I
agree.
agree with that law. So whatever defense I'm going to use, it better be good if he took my son's life.
Right. Well, thank you for taking my call.
You know, because I don't want Americans to think that they should become vigilantes. That's not the way the country is run. If we were to allow private citizens in this country to become judge, jury, and executioner, we cannot have a country, because there's got to be boundaries. And our courts have clearly stated what the boundaries are. It's been around for about 40 some odd years. It came right into existence in the case of Tennessee versus Garner, which said that even a police officer should not be shooting and killing a fleeing suspect. You know, so our law is pretty clear, Pierre, on this issue. We should never look at the idea of using deadly force for a suspect, particularly in this case, a low-level felony or misdemeanor. And so, regardless of the value of property, there's a couple things that come to existence. We have insurance, and most insurance policies are not named peril, they're all risk. So when somebody causes damage to your property, it's covered by your comp coverage. Usually your deductible is $50 or $100, and the insurance company pays for repair. And it's wrong for anyone to commit a crime of vandalism or cause injury or damage to your property. But is $100 more valuable than a human life? You know, so if we were to relegate our thought process that I'm going to murder somebody because they're breaking into my car, and I'm in my house and I see them outside, and I'm going to go out and shoot and kill them, I just don't think that's the way society should be. It would make us all unsafe. And also, this is a 13-year-old kid that you're talking about. You know, what are the circumstances as to why a 13-year-old kid's out at 4 o'clock in the morning in the first place? Was he hungry? Was he homeless? You know, what led this 13-year-old to engage in this process? You know, I like to, it'd be fascinating type to find out, but I'm not justifying what a 13-year-old did. I'm just saying that the consequence was too severe for the action, reported action in my mind. You know, but that's my thought process. Now, going forward, back to Dr. Martin Luther King. I grew up in the segregated South, and a lot of people are unaware of the history of America. Now we have politicians that are currently rewriting history. I attended a law school that did not admit the first Black in the law school until 1973, the University of Georgia Law School. So now, why is that? Because of the idea of segregation. And it was prevalent up through the 70s. And now we have politicians that are conveniently rewriting history. Dr. King's non-violent protest was important back in the 50s and the 60s. And I submit that it's still important today. I still believe that the civil rights issue is still a struggle. I believe that the House and Senate failed to restore the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was a mistake. We see the idea of political gerrymandering to prevent the suppression of African-American advancement in the political sphere. We see lack of investments in our community. In every state, there's been billions of dollars that have been advanced, and yet oftentimes that money does not come to our community. That lead to an increase in crime and an unequal ecosystem in terms of the ability of people to buy homes and things like that. So all those lead to higher elements of crime. So civil rights is still necessary today, in my mind, and just as relevant as it was back in the 60s, and I see it in our justice system, Attorney Grimes and Banks, I see it in our system. I personally witnessed what I think is just a flawed system, even today. I'm not talking about in the 50s or 60s, I'm talking about today. It's still relevant. And I know you have to have that. You're in LA, you got a lot of minority. Is the system completely just there? Or do you have problems?
We have problems. We just enacted a law called the Racial Justice Act, which allows us as criminal defense lawyers to inquire of the prosecution how they are charging, arresting, and prosecuting and sentencing defendants for the same or similar crime. And the statistics show a drastic difference, such as our incarceration of every 100,000 whites, there's approximately 127 of them in prison, men. Of every 100,000 blacks, there's 1,700 in prison. Something is wrong with those statistics. So we're recognizing, not only in California with that Racial Justice Act, with that base as a start, that there's discrimination in arresting, there's discrimination in charging, there's discrimination in prosecuting and sentencing African Americans to other, and they're recognized because they're gathering statistics for that on a disparity. How are we going to resolve that disparity? We still have racial profiling with car stops. They've shown that with car stops being the majority of the stops throughout the state are on African Americans as opposed to other races. It shows that on those stops with African Americans, there is excessive force used as compared to other races, and that especially with young people, teenagers and early 20s, they are physically violated and force is used on them more than other races. So how are we going to stop this particular thing from continuing? Does it go back to who do we hire? We found out up in Northern California about 2 months ago that they had to dismiss in the Oakland area 43 cops who had been hired and did not pass the psychological analysis properly, failed it, showing that they could use violence without provocation. So we have a situation that exists in our society where we still are not properly training or screening people who are put in positions of control and trust. I'm reading a book, excuse me, by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers. But in that book, there's some topics that are very dear to me, and that is this subject or this word called emotional labor. Police officers, teachers, waitresses, flight attendants, etc. There are some professions where people engage other people on a regular basis. They have to be trained and taught how to deal with people who are mad, people who may have a mental illness, and people who are calm and people who need help. Unlike most of us in our jobs, lawyers too have called labor jobs, which requires as to what they can and can't do. And oftentimes they're not mature and trained and educated enough for these roles. But we think if we fill the slot, then the person is qualified. Shucks, that ain't gonna work. And it keeps showing it doesn't work. So we got a job to do to restructure and rebuild these institutions that have emotional labor involved. That's how I feel.
A final comment, Attorney Banks?
All of the examples that Milton just provided clearly demonstrate that Dr. King's work is not done,
Nope.
and that there's still much work that we have to do. I believe that if Dr. King was here today, that he would be leading coalitions and grassroots efforts and faith-based and churches toward advocating against police brutality, voter suppression. He'd be advocating for the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, because he would be disturbed by the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court. And he would be focused on redistricting and advocating for equality in health, education, housing, and social justice.
Well, a point of departure on this issue, ladies and gentlemen, audience, this is an important holiday, and I'm asking everybody to do the following. Find somebody who's not registered to vote and try to get them registered to vote. If somebody call you about getting a subpoena for jury duty, make sure that they honor that subpoena, because we need each of you to participate in the American justice experience. Because when you have citizens like yourself participate in the process, it gives us the best opportunity to ensure that justice is equal under the law. And so I'd like to thank you and our callers and our audience for listening in on our various media. And next week, we will have another exciting show. So God bless and keep you. And of course, thanks to our special superstars guest panel today. Thank you, everyone.
Good
Have a great
seeing
week.
you, Nate. Good hearing you, Vanita. Have a happy King holiday, y'all.